Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. My name's Dan, this is Exploder, and I have another episode just for, well, let's just say you. Alright, let's go with it. In this episode I want to step away from, I don't want to talk about the current product because it's depressing. And I'm not really so much going to talk about the nostalgia like I have in the past, the 90s, a little bit of the 80s and so on. In this one, I want to go a little off the kilter, and I want to talk about independent wrestling. Now, specifically, some of the weird things you run across, some of the weirdos, scumbags, and jackasses you may meet along the way. Years ago, not so much now, I was trained and actually have worked in the past backstage for a company called War Wrestling. War Wrestling is a great promotion. Up in Lima, Ohio. It is the remnants of, really, it's a long history. War Wrestling was started in 2003, and by Big Tom, Ripper Blackheart, and I believe Dusty Dillinger. I could be wrong, but I think Dusty Dillinger was one of the original partners. And if you're from Lima, Ohio, or from anywhere Ohio, Indiana, Michigan area, you might know one of those names, and you'll know what I'm talking about. War Wrestling came from the Worldwide Wrestling Alliance. Worldwide Wrestling Alliance was from the remnants of the GWA. The GWA, the Global Wrestling Alliance, was started by Al Snow. When he was still on working, he was on WWE payroll, but he was working for ECW. He was working for WWE, doing the Leaf Cassidy thing. He had a school and promotion in Lima, Ohio at the time. He had Body Slammers Gym, the original Body Slammers Gym in Lima, Ohio, where they trained guys like Blue Meanie, D'Lo Brown, spent the time there. Even a young guy, who was at the time called the Ringmaster, Steve Austin, spent a little time in Lima, Ohio, working with Al. So it's actually, for a small town, considerably. Lima's like 38,000 people, give or take. It actually at one point used to have a really decently well-known school. Matter of fact, Steve Corino stole a story where when he went to Tom Brandy's school, they asked him if he had ever been in the ring before, he ever trained before, and he lied to them and said, of all people, he was trained by Al Snow in Lima, Ohio. Little piece of trivia there if you never heard that story from Steve Corino. It's a little funny story. But around a few years ago, I still work for them sometimes behind the scenes. I'm not a wrestler, I'm not a ref, I'm not a manager, I'm nothing of any importance. I help set up the ring, I help put chairs up, whatever, and just help backstage wherever I can. I've been fine with that position. I have, I would have liked to done more, but like I said, I trained, but I was never really cut out for the ring, and I was honest with myself about that. But I liked helping behind the scenes. I liked helping wherever I could. Why I say that is because while I do still work for them now and again, depending on my work schedule, there was a time in my life where I went to a lot of independent shows. I went to independent shows in Lima. I went to them in Bellefontaine. There used to be a National Guard armory called the Sea Battery. They would run shows. I remember seeing American Lucha Corps, which is a promotion run by Impact Wrestling star Sami Callihan before he moved to New Jersey to become the trainer for CZW. This was about, they ran about 5 or 6 shows. I want to say like 5 shows in Bellefontaine at the Sea Battery, and they brought in a lot of guys. They brought in a young Tyler Black, Jimmy Jacobs, independent guys like Billy Rock. And if you're in the Indiana area and you know Billy Rock, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And he's, a good indie guy, been around forever. Actually trained Big Sue. I'm a big shout out to Big Sue Jackson, who's a guy I've known literally since high school. We were part of the same message board back in the day. And just a little shout out to him. He actually went to Billy Rock school and became Big Sue Jackson. I'm not going to share his real name. I don't want to break kayfabe on that. But he became Big Sue Jackson. He's actually worked Independence, and I saw him, and he's a really great guy. So big shout out to him. But these Lucha Corps shows would bring in a lot of guys. I saw guys, and I also went there and saw a show at the Sea Battery, same place in Bellefontaine. I saw Ego Pro Wrestling, which was a little project of Cody Hawk. Cody Hawk, of course, was coming off, I wouldn't say the destruction, but sort of the decline of HWA. HWA, of course, was run by Les Thatcher, was actually 1.8 WWE developmental, and as it lost that, and I don't know the minutiae, I don't know the inner workings, and I'm not going to sit here and claim otherwise. All I know is that this was not an HWA show. This was an Ego Pro show, and it was run by Cody Hawk, and I actually know Cody Hawk through War Wrestling. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say we're best buddies or that I hang out with him or whatever. I know him. I've seen him. We shake hands backstage, things like that. But I've seen these shows, and then when Ring of Honor, I haven't done this in many years, but I used to go to Ring of Honor to the county fairgrounds where they would have, Ring of Honor would actually come quite often because it was a double shot with Dayton and Chicago. And they would do Dayton on Friday night, and then they'd do Chicago Ridge, whatever, on Saturday Saturday night. That was sort of how they did it. And Dayton, this was years ago. Kerry Slocum was still the owner of the company. Gabe Sapolsky was still the booker when I first started going. My first show was the 5th year anniversary show, Dayton. So that 5th year anniversary started that'd be 2007. February of 2007 was the first show. That night, I got to see Samoa Joe's last match in Dayton for Ring of Honor, and I saw him kick Davey Richards in the spine. Really, not even the spine, like the neck. And yeah, I loved it. I also saw that was also the one where he did the leg kick with Davey Richards sitting in the chair, and he went through, and I'm in the 3rd row, and they pushed the guardrail so far back that everyone's pushing, and Samoa Joe's foot got caught in the Ring of Honor. Used to have these big metal signs over the guardrail, so it would say, Ring of Honor, and it's a sheet metal, this really thin sheet metal, and it bent around his ankle, and it's to the point where a fan had to hold the guardrail and Joe had to pull his leg out. Like, that's how close we were. But I digress. So for a while there, I went to a lot of independent shows, and along the way on these independent shows, you find some, let's just say, weirdos, oddballs, what have you. One of the weirdos to speak of, a Ring of Honor show, I think it was my second one. I'm in the 2nd row I'm actually going to remember the size. I remember, one thing people know about me, I remember small details that are bizarre, how detailed they are. I remember, like, names. I remember phone numbers of people that I haven't talked to in 20 years. And I have no reason to talk to them, but I remember things that are bizarre. I'm on the hard camera side. So in Dayton, at the place affectionately called the Oven, because during the summer, and I went to one of these shows, it's awful. During the summer, it is horribly compacted, and it's just hot. And the fans called it the Oven, and I know exactly why after one of those shows. But I'm on the hard camera side, so that is B section. Yeah, I think B section. And I'm facing the entranceway, and there's a guy in the front row, and the fans around us we called him Drunk Homeless Guy, DHG. DHG was clearly both. He was clearly hammered, and he was clearly homeless. And I'm not making fun of the guy because he was homeless, but it was a fact. If you looked at it, you're like, yeah, this guy's homeless. And he was turned back in his chair talking to someone else in the 2nd row, and he's talking about how this building, which is a fairgrounds building, it's a community building or whatever, big empty building that they use for different shows, used to host boxing. And he wouldn't shut up about boxing. For about a half hour before the show, he would not shut up about boxing. No one there is to watch boxing. I don't care if you like boxing. I don't know if anyone around him liked boxing, and certainly didn't want to talk about it back in the 50s. So we're all sitting there, we're wondering what's going on here. How is this clearly drunk, clearly homeless guy have front row seats to Ring of Honor? Now, I'm sure now, because I haven't been to a Ring of Honor show in years, I imagine tickets now are a lot more. But even back then, front row around that time was probably hard to come by. They were, because the closest I ever got was 2nd row, and I think they were probably around $45, $55 back then. It was something like that. I could be highballing a little bit, but it was something like that. This guy's clearly drunk and homeless, and he's in the front row. So we're all wondering, this is a little weird. Well, it turns out one of those guys in security, I don't know, they had a bunch of guys. One of the guys they had working security, one of the regular Ring of Honor crew guys, are walking around, and they asked to see his ticket. And the guy had a ticket. The guy actually had a ticket. They look at the ticket. The guy had a GA ticket. The guy had a $10 general admission ticket in the not even the floor chairs. Like, he was up in the bleachers. And he had just found his way to the front, and people thought, oh yeah, he's fine. No, he was a GA ticket. So he finally moved. So that was the end of DHG. That was the end of Drunk Homeless Guy. And again, that's just one of those weird people you run into at indie shows. And I've always liked indie shows. Indie shows are fun because sometimes you run into that. War Wrestling has a fair share of guys. There was a guy I used to call Crypt Keeper. I called him Zeus because he was this big, hairy, long-haired, bearded, like, think of a Greek god like character, something Liam Neeson would play when he's out to kick ass in the past. That's what this guy looked like. He was just this big burly guy, old, but he was old as can be. I can't even remember how old he was. He was probably in his 60s, maybe 70s. And I called him Zeus, and then someone clued me in. Someone gave me the hint, and they called him Crypt Keeper. And in War Wrestling, if you're, again, this may just be too in the weeds for some people, but I'm just gonna say it because we're talking about independence. If you are in the Lima, Ohio area or know of this guy, there's a guy called Chocolate Thunder. I don't know the guy's real name. I don't care, but he maybe gets a little too into it, and he's the reason why they have security. He's the guy that they have to hold back sometimes from the wrestlers, and he's a big guy, but I get this feeling, and I don't want to make fun of the guy, but I get this feeling feeling he may not all be there. You know the kind of person who may have a job and may function, but you can tell there's a card missing in the deck. You know what I mean? Like a little bit. Like, not that they're violent, not that they're mean, but like they may not 100% get it. That's this guy.
When Bastion Booger ate the gobbledygooker, we were there. It's Newsflash. This just in, the last WrestleMania attendee has finally left the parking lot. All Elite Wrestling appears to have struck a TV deal with TBS for their upcoming show. Wrestling fans anxiously await the debut of Thunder 2. Joey Ryan did something with his dick. Probably. April 11th marked the 76th birthday of former NWA champion Harley Race. The Grim Reaper is still 40 years away from getting the guts to try anything. Following his match with Triple H at WrestleMania, Dave Bautista officially announced he's retired from pro wrestling. He'll still make more appearances this year than Brock Lesnar. In unexpected news, Nia Jax injured herself this time. She'll be out of action for months due to torn ACLs. They weren't torn, they just gave up. WWE has announced that Backlash will not take place this year and has been replaced by WWE Stomping Grounds. Some are questioning the generic name, but then again, they used to have a show called Great Balls of Fire, so it could always be worse. That's gonna do it for this time. Let's get back to the show.
And I say all that to get to this. This is something I've been thinking about recently. I'm not exactly sure why, but I just did, and it's one of the reasons I decided to do this episode. And I want to share with you, again, from a personal place, I want to share with you the ballad of Nicky Heyman. That's right, I said Nicky Heyman. During the time where I was going around Independence, and this may be more of a thing with Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky, I don't know how far and wide this person was, but I did encounter her a couple times. I encountered her at a Ring of Honor show, and I encountered her at the aforementioned Ego Pro show, and I think at one of the LuchaCore shows back in Bell Fountain. Again, this was maybe, if I had to guess, this was like 10 years ago. Nicky Heyman was a woman who would show up at the shows, pay for a ticket, do the whole thing, but she would be dressed head to toe as Paul Heyman. Now that in itself is not that weird. I mean, if you ever see a WWE show, especially in places like Japan, where guys and girls dress up with their favorite wrestler, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's fine. If she wants to dress like Paul Heyman, heck, if she really dresses like Paul Heyman, that's good for her business. I don't care. If she wants to dress like a 6-year-old Jewish man, more power to her. As long as she doesn't bounce checks, I think we're fine. But the thing about Nicky Heyman was it got even more bizarre, and I noticed this because I would overhear conversations. Nicky Heyman at one of the shows, I know for a fact she's in the line. She's about 3 or 4 people ahead of me, and by this point I knew who she was. Like I didn't know her name. I called her Paula. At the time I called her Paula Heyman. You know the joke. I didn't know she was Nicky Heyman. I found out later what her name was, Nicky Heyman. But anyway, she's 2 or 3 people ahead of me, and she's talking to some kids. And at this time I'm about 22, 23. I'm an adult. I'm a young adult, but I'm an adult. But she's talking to kids. She's talking to kids that are about 12, 13 years old. And during it, she's talking and blah, blah, blah. And I hear her just sort of haphazardly mention something about Uncle Paul. And that perked my ears up, like a Scooby-Doo moment. Like, huh? She kept, yeah, Uncle Paul, blah, blah, blah. Uncle Paul. And she said that a few times. I was like, okay. And then I saw the Paul Heyman gimmick, so I'm like, is she really arguing that Paul Heyman's her uncle? Is that what she's doing? But I let that go. Something. And then later I hear her talking, and she walks by. And keep in mind, she has the jacket, the lanyard, the hat, everything. She's doing the full Paul Heyman gimmick. And I hear her talking, and someone mentions to her, like, oh, what are you doing here? Just, knowing that she looks like Paul Heyman, but more likely to have a husband. And she says something so dumb, so like bothersome. More than the Uncle Paul stuff, I couldn't really believe what I had just heard. They said, what are you doing here? And she goes, oh yeah, I'm scouting referees for the WWE. She was at a show at a National Guard armory in Bell Fountain, Ohio. And I can't remember if this was LuchaCore or if this was Ego Pro. I don't remember. And really to this story, it doesn't matter. And she says that she, on behalf of the WWE, as someone named Nicky Heyman, whose uncle is Paul Heyman, is in Bell Fountain, Ohio, scouting referees for the WWE. She says this out loud, and she says this with full conviction. Now, the first 2 or 3 times I encounter her, I think she's just a crazy fan. I think she's like the Crypt Keeper, or she's like Chocolate Thunder, or she's just somebody who's a fan. And again, maybe there's not all the, maybe the elevator don't go all the way to the top, as my grandfather's expression would go. And my grandfather used to say that. And I thought maybe that's what it was. And it turns out, no. It's worse. Because it's one thing to be someone who likes wrestling who's a little too into it. I mean, every once in a while, there's these people that grew up with kayfabe. They understand there is a generation of people to this day that existed where watched most of their wrestling in a time of kayfabe that hated Freddie Blassie. Remember, people used to stab wrestlers. Freddie Blassie was famously stabbed multiple times. Terry Funk has been stabbed. I mean, there were riots. Ernie Ladd would talk about riots. I mean, wrestling at one point was so kayfabe. I mean, there was I can't remember which Anderson, one of the Andersons was stabbed by a fan in the alleyway after a show. I believe that might have been Gene. I could be wrong on that, but I think it was Gene. So understand, there are people that watch wrestling even now that used to live with 100% kayfabe. And I guarantee a lot of these older people aren't on the internet. They're not reading this. They don't know that kayfabe's been broken. So when they go and they see a show, they are immersed. And in one way, they're the most pure fans because they're not bogged down by politics. They're not bogged down by what they heard on the internet. They're not bogged down by rumors or whether this guy's leaving the promotion or whether this woman's a real life diva, yada, yada, yada. They don't have that. They're the most pure fans. And I love that. In another way, you have people that believe 100% of what they see, don't know any other context, and in some cases, they're absolute lunatics. And it's not their fault. Some people, like I said, they're just not all there mentally. And I thought that's what she was. I thought she was just a delusional person who in her head thought this was all real. And when I saw that, I felt bad for her. It was someone I sort of avoided at shows, but I felt bad for her. But it turns out I was wrong. No. It turns out that it's way worse. You know what's worse? She wasn't a delusional fan. She was working. Let me give a little context. Nicky Heyman was a manager, a wrestling manager who sort of drifted in and out of the independents during the 2000s. Honestly, if you look her up online, you're going to find her a little bit, and you're going to find someone else who's done other things, a producer of some sort. And it's not her. The one you're looking at, if you find a picture of her, God help you, but she's a heavier woman. I think she had red hair last time I remember. So anything you see about a producer of this show or that, it's not her. Nicky Heyman was a manager and sort of, like I said, sort of drifted out of the independents. So what makes this worse is she wasn't some delusional fan who really thought Paul Heyman was her uncle. She was a low-level independent manager who showed up to a show that she was not booked on in gimmick, in character, and proceeded to, in her own little way, work the crowd. She wasn't in the show. She wasn't managing anyone in the show. She wasn't working in ring crew. She wasn't working. I mean, she had no part of the show. She showed up as a fan. She paid for a ticket. She sat in the chairs. But in her own little way, she was sitting around working people, working her gimmick while the show was going on. That to me is 10 times worse. That's not even the drunk homeless guy. That's not even the person who's out of their minds or maybe a little off, who just likes wrestling and maybe like it a little too much. This is somebody who's going to another show and working it on their own time. They're going into the business for themselves. And like I said, she didn't interrupt the show. She didn't do a stupid run-in or anything like that. But to me, like, that's worse than the delusional fan. It's the person who's actively a worker in one way or another, disrupting another one's show, doing it. Like, why would you do that? Like, that's what I don't understand. It's one thing like with ECW, the ECW invasion in '97 when they showed up on Raw. The Eliminators didn't just jump in the ring during a match and beat someone up. That was a work. They were invited. WWE knew they were coming. They knew the Eliminators were coming. They knew Taz was coming. They knew Sabu was coming. They knew Paul Heyman was going to grab the mic at a certain time. They knew these things. So it's an invasion, but it was an invasion where people knew what was going on. Even in Mind Games, 1996, with when they showed up and during the Justin Hawk Bradshaw Savio Vega match, Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, and Paul Heyman, even then, JBL was not clued in. Dutch Mantel was not clued in. Uncle Zeb, whatever you want to call him, Zeb Coulter. Savio Vega was kind of clued in, but not really. But even then, for the most part, the people that needed to know knew. So that's not the same thing. This is literally someone going to another show in their gimmick and working their gimmick on their own during someone else's show. That to me is bizarre. And again, I wonder, because, and the thing was, she didn't get a booking out of it. You know, it's one thing to show up like as yourself, and I know some guys will have this ego, and which amazes me, especially on the independent level. Some guys will have an ego, but they won't go to an indie show unless they're booked. Oh, I'm not going to go. The old Dennis Stamp thing from Beyond the Mat. Well, I'm not booked, so I'm not going. Well, that's weird. You know, if you're really a wrestling fan, I mean, it's fine. If you're from BFE and you happen to be in Ohio, you know, you can try to get a booking, but even if you don't, you just want to go to a show, go to a show. I mean, I cannot imagine, I mean, there's very few guys that are such a big star that going to a show that they're not booked on is going to ruin their cred or whatever. Or show up backstage and hang out and introduce yourself or what have you. I've seen that. There's nothing wrong with that. but the kind of mindset, the mindset that shows up in another one's show in their gimmick that is completely unrelated to the promotion and just works it. Not as an angle, not trying to get a job, but just to do that. That's, to me, is so weird. I don't understand that. Outside of that, I know she did a blog on angrymarks.com where she, and I'm not knocking her on this was awesome, where she did a little post where she talked about the passing of Matt Anawai. I may have butchered that last name, that's the best I can do, but Rosie, when he passed away. And she'd worked with him before in the past, and she knew him, and honestly, it was really touching and very nice. And she even says it in there. She sort of was in and out of the independents, and she had her contacts. She knew guys, and she'd worked at HWA and this, that, and the other. But, so I'm not sitting here trying to bury her. I just think it was one of the weirdest things I ever saw with someone doing that. So, yeah, that was sort of my story of Nicky Heyman. I don't know why I thought of that. It just came up, and I was like, this is just a bizarre thing that you only run into on professional wrestling on the indie scene. You're not going to see it on WWE. WWE is not going to, they're not going to, even if they don't mean to, but they're not. Kenny Omega is not going to show up on Monday Night Raw in the crowd. It's just not going to happen because they're not going to allow it. And they're not going to let them do their gimmick. I mean, the worst they ever got was when the Bucks and them did the thing across the street, which they can't control across the street. But yeah, so this is one of those stories you're going to get on the independents, and I just thought it was funny. The story of Nicky Heyman. So, I mean, if you know, and honestly, if anyone knows the whereabouts of Nicky Heyman now, I mean, I don't know if she's in the business. I don't think she is, but if she's just doing a blog or working for a website or whatever, I'd be interested to know. But yeah, so that was just my take on the story of Nicky Heyman. So what do you guys think? Do you think I'm sort of going overboard with this on how I perceived her working when she wasn't working type of thing? Or am I just talking out my butt? I don't know. Whatever you think, let me know. Send a message to the page, post, do whatever you want. Let me know what you think. If you have any suggestions for a future show, I'm sort of just doing whatever I want to do on a weekly basis, which is fun. But if you guys have any ideas, you have any more questions, you have anything you want to say, want to do something be future, hey, I'm open to pretty much anything, most everything. I'm not doing a best of Virgil, the hell with that. But other than that, I'm pretty much open to everything. So yeah, so until next time, my name's Dan, this is Exploder, have a good one.